Welcome back, everybody. So, I had a little bit of a change of plans. I have a couple of sick kiddos here at the house, so we ended up having to cancel our trip, cancel our hotel, cancel all of that. We didn't want to drag, uh, we didn't want to drag sick kids in the car for hours and staying out of town. We felt like that wouldn't be totally fair to them. So, we're staying here for the week. I'll have an opportunity to do videos pretty much like normal. Everything will be the same. I have talked about this in other videos, but I did a deep dive a couple of months ago over the Bofors 40mm AA gun. It was something that came up at one point or another during World War II reading that I was doing, and it just kind of took me down a different rabbit hole. So I decided that I was going to do this today. It is Forgotten Weapons, Swedish anti-aircraft artillery, the Bofors 40mm automatic cannon M1 or automatic gun M1. If they don't talk about it in the video, the story of how the U.S. got this gun, because it was widely used during World War II. Basically, everybody used it. If they don't tell the story about how the U.S. got it, I'm going to tell that story before the end of this video because it's an awesome story. But let's jump into it. Forgotten Weapons, the Bofors 40mm. Let's go.
Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum and I'm here today at the Rock Island Auction Company where they've started doing some kind of bigger guns. This is a Swedish-made Bofors 40mm anti-aircraft gun, and this thing was developed in the 1930s. It was adopted by the US Navy in 1938 and by the US Army in 1941 and by almost everyone else in the world too at some point.
I don't think that's actually correct. Mm, I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure the U.S. Navy did not adopt it that early. In fact, I'm almost positive they didn't. They adopted a different platform, a different weapon system in 1937 and didn't like it. And then they ended up getting into negotiations for a license to produce it in 1939, 1940, sometime around there. It was not it was not that early that the Navy put it in service. At least as far as I know, I've never read something that says it's that early.
This thing saw service in all fronts and on both sides of World War II. This thing is actually a machine gun as well as being a cannon. So it's 40mm, but to put things in perspective, what we're talking about is it's a 4-pound shell, each actual cartridge, and the projectile part is about 2 pounds. So just under 1 full kilo of projectile being fired between 27 and 2,800 feet per second. So that's the same muzzle velocity as an M1 Garand, a 30-06 rifle. And you're getting that out of a 2-pound high explosive projectile. And you're getting 2 of them every second. This thing fires at 120 rounds per minute because it is also a machine gun. So for the US...
Yeah, and that is true. It shoots fast as hell, but it's manually loaded and it's in these like 4-round cartridges. So they're not really being shot out that fast, not on average, certainly. But it does fire quickly. For the time period, it certainly fires quickly.
And really for everyone else who used these things, this was a piece of intermediate level anti-aircraft artillery. This filled the gap between a large anti-aircraft gun, something like a 90mm, a 3-inch anti-aircraft gun, which could fire at, say, bombers at high altitude, and on the small end, something like a 50 caliber machine gun set up for anti-aircraft use. This fits right in the middle. And it's really cool. Now, when the US adopted this thing, it was being manufactured by Bofors in Sweden, and it wasn't exactly a high volume sort of production. In fact, I think kind of from the US perspective, they looked at this and they're like, Bofors must be this like sod roofed old style, you know, ye old factory with like workers with leather caps and little teeny bifocal glasses and anvils and hammers and files and stuff making these guns. In reality, they were magnificently made guns. They were handcrafted. They were excellent.
That may be a little bit of a hyperbole, but they were certainly hesitant about it initially, which is, to me, that's actually really interesting because the U.S. isn't in the war yet, not in any real capacity, although you could certainly argue that they are helping one side over another, but they're not actively involved in the war yet. And everybody that's fighting, for the most part, is using some form of this gun. And so you would think that that would initially just due to the fact that everybody's using it, make you think like, okay, well, it must be a good gun. The U.S. just didn't prefer it. I don't even think they really were wanting to look at it. But yeah, obviously, eventually they changed their mind.
And this is, in fact, an original early Swedish production one. But the U.S. needed more than Bofors could be producing, especially in time of war. We didn't want to have to be buying these things from the Swedes at, you know, expensive manufacturing costs and then trying to ship them across the Atlantic Ocean, or even just transporting them from Sweden somehow into Europe. Like, this is going to be difficult. There's submarines and Germans around.
Yeah, that was not plausible. If you know World War II, you know the situation in the Atlantic during this time. Like, if you were going to get a ship through there, it better be plastered with, you know, all over it with insignias of a neutral country. I mean, it better be a ship that has nothing to do with this war, and nothing about it makes it look sketchy or like it could be potentially carrying anything war related, or it was probably going to get sunk. Like, it just, you did not want to go through the Atlantic, especially up in the northern Atlantic during this time period. There's a war going on. It's a war zone. And that's a big part of the war is, you know, the cat and mouse game being played between the German and British Navy out in the Atlantic.
So instead, the U.S. bought licensing rights to manufacture these in the United States. And in fact, the Firestone Company, now known for tires, manufactured the carriages, these wheeled assemblies, and Chrysler manufactured the guns. During World War II, Chrysler built 60,000 of these things. That's a hard number for me to even wrap my head around. And by the way, 120,000 barrels, because every gun they made a spare barrel for as well. As I said, these would see service in all theaters, but it was in the Pacific that they were particularly effective and necessary. By the time these were actually in the field for the US, it was basically 1943, and the height of German air power had really come and gone. And the US, you know, this wasn't so critical in Europe. Still useful, but it was in the Pacific where it was really essential, where these were used by US Navy vessels as defense against Japanese air attack. All right, let's talk about how this thing actually worked.
Yeah, there's just something about, you know, having a bunch of pilots who will intentionally fly their plane into the side of your ship that makes them a little bit more threatening or menacing. I don't know exactly what that is.
Because it's not quite what you might expect. This requires a crew of 3 men. You'll notice there are 2 seats. That's not because you have a redundant operator. You need both of these guys. So what's going on here is crewman number 1 is sitting over here, and he controls the gun's traverse, pivoting it around side to side. You'll notice he has a spider sight to target whatever aircraft they're trying to shoot at. Operator number 2 sits over here, and his hand wheels control the gun's elevation. He also has a sight. He also has a foot trigger, and he's the one who fires the gun. So guy number one over here is constantly just keeping the traverse on the airplane. That's his only job. Guy number two only has to deal with the elevation of the gun and firing it, but firing with your foot, that's not a particularly complex matter. When the sight's on the target, push the trigger. Guy number three would be back here, and he's responsible for actually loading the gun. This thing was fed with 4-round stripper clips, and it would actually fire faster than you could load it. This was the sort of thing where you'd load in 4 rounds, and then when you had the gun on target, the gunner, the primary gunner, would fire a burst, probably all 4 rounds, and then while they're reacquiring the target, the loader shoves another clip of ammunition into it.
Yeah, and a lot of the pictures you'll see from this time period, there isn't just one loader. There's a slew of guys back there. Now, there may be like guys that are doing other stuff for the gun, you know, talking to them about other targets coming in or something like that. But it's doesn't look at least like it's just one loader.
This thing has a pretty fast rate of traverse. On the M2A1 carriage, which is what we have here, and this was updated as aircraft got faster and faster, this thing, every full rotation of these handles gives me 17 1/7 degrees of rotation of the whole gun.
Damn.
The previous M1 version or the M2, the basic version of the carriage, it did 6 degrees per revolution. So they about doubled, almost tripled the rate of rotation. Now this thing can do a full 360. There's nothing to stop it except the wall behind me. And it can go from pointing straight up 90 degrees to -6 degrees downward angle. You could use this in a direct fire roll, and it was. This carriage, of course, is set up for anti-aircraft use, but they did make both high explosive, which was, I think, the primary ammunition used, and they did also make an armor-piercing cartridge or projectile for these things. And you know, a light-skinned vehicle, this could do some serious damage to a light-skinned.
Yeah, and I think you get something like 10 to 15,000 extra feet on the round, on the distance of the round or potential distance on the round, whenever you're firing it horizontally versus some sort of vertical angle, which obviously that makes sense. And if you're using it in a direct fire roll like that, you may need it to go potentially further. But like he said earlier, with the heavier anti-aircraft guns, something like this was not going to reach a high-level bomber. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I think it could get up to, let's see, 20 to 25,000 feet. I think if you had, if you were shooting it at an aircraft, I'm pretty sure that's how high it could go, which would normally be fine for any sort of fighters or dive bombers or whatever. But your high-level bombers obviously are going to be a bit out of reach.
And vehicle. All right, so feeding this thing is done up here. This is actually just a cover over the clip loading machine. This has a mechanical setup here to pull cartridges down off the stripper clip. You don't exactly just thumb them into this thing. So you put a clip on here, in place, and let the gun do the rest. Now it's kind of hard to see because we've got this ejection chute stuffed on the back of the gun in the way, but this isn't an anti-aircraft gun like, say, a 20mm Ehrlichen, which is basically simple blowback. This is much more like a standard artillery piece set up for rapid fire with a loading operation. This has a vertically traveling breech block, which is right up inside here. So that breech block is going to slide up and down to lock the cartridge in place, and then it slides open, kicks out the empty cartridge, which is going to come out through this ejection. Well, it's going to come straight back here. It's going to get hit by this chute and funneled down to here, whereupon it skips down into this chute and goes zwee right out the front of the gun under the barrel. You can see a cooling cutout here for this big old recoil spring. So the whole
Yeah.
barrel reciprocates backward when the gun fires. And that's the energy that is used to open the breech block, feed a cartridge, and then close. This is like a giant semi-auto falling block gun.
Yeah, that's awesome.
All right, something else that I want to point out. This gun has a lot of recoil when it fires, enough that they put outriggers onto it. There's one over there. Stop that. There's one over here, and then there are outrigger feet on the front and the back of the carriage. So in order to safely fire this, you have to set this whole thing up, and we didn't quite do it for one good reason. I'm reading through the manual, and you are explicitly warned not to mess with the suspension setup unless you have 2 guys adjusting it and 2 more dudes holding the thing in place. Well, I don't have a whole gun crew at my disposal to set this up. So the way this actually works is these axles actually pivot. The front axle pivots forward and the rear axle pivots backward, which lowers this whole carriage down towards the ground to lower its center of gravity.
I've talked about this before on a different video. I don't remember which one, but some of the funniest videos I've ever seen online are when big guns like this are not set up properly. They're not pinned down in some way. And it is hilarious to me. Obviously, super dangerous. You know, you shouldn't do it to be funny. But it's just, I can't help. I just die laughing every time that I see them.
You can see the outrigger here. That's at its lowest depth of travel, and it's almost a foot off the ground. So in order for this to actually be set up, you have to hold the gun in place, pivot these wheels up and out of the way so that the gun's actually resting on these pads. Now, the reason that they did that is because the point of the pads is stability, and the best way to get stability is to lower this whole thing down towards the ground, not to put it on nice tall feet. That's going to make it just wobble around a lot more. You have to make sure it doesn't tip over, yes, but you also want to make sure that it doesn't rock when it's firing, because it's a machine gun. You want it to be stable and put the shots exactly on the same place every time so that you can try to actually hit a fast-moving aerial target. This thing is just really cool. So a few other bits of history to touch on. First off, like I said, this was used by more than just the United States. The British actually also used these. And in fact, these Bofors guns are credited with a couple of V1 rocket bomb shoot-downs or kills, potentially making them one of the very first anti-missile weapon systems, which is kind of cool. In addition, let's see, the Bofors system would be enormously successful worldwide, of course, and would go on to be successful after the war. So in 1947, they actually made a serious update to this whole contraption. They realized jet-powered aircraft were starting to make this sort of gun a bit obsolete, and in an effort to kind of delay that obsolescence, the new version had a longer barrel. It used a more powerful cartridge. They upped the rate of fire from 120 rounds a minute to 240 rounds a minute, so doubled it. And perhaps most significantly, they added electrical or a gas engine and electrical motors to this so that you could have one gunner with a couple of control wheels doing everything instead of trying to coordinate 2 separate guys to do the aiming. So that...
Yeah, and I've talked about this before. It's really hard when, tech that is top of the line, super useful, awesome for its time period, can become obsolete so quickly, especially in a time like the 20th century when things are just, they're moving so fast in terms of military technology. I like the idea of kind of twisting around the edges, trying to tinker with something enough to keep it relevant. I've talked about this with some other weapons that we've done on the channel, but I like that idea of having a base system. It's starting to become obsolete with new technology. And instead of totally scrapping it immediately and being like, all right, well, we need something brand new because this isn't working for what we need it for, instead they go back and say, okay, we like the system itself. We like the way that the whole thing works. Is there any way that we could change things here or there with it that would make it, that would get it to a point where it would still be useful with the tech we're needing it, to meet today. I like that thought process in general.
Gun, I mean, I think those guns are still in service today in various militaries. These are actually still in service even with the US in the AC-130 gunships. We have Bofors
Oh yeah.
40mm guns up.
Shit, I totally forgot about that. I could literally have told you the guns that are on the AC-130 gunship. What do they call it? Spooky. Um, I have read that and heard that a million times and never ever even like it never clicked in my brain.
In those guys, and people, they're still very effective. There's nothing wrong with these things to this day. I also want to touch on the aiming. While you can see the two spider sight setup here. And in World War II, that's what you had. However, even in World War II, they had a very early system of networked and computerized and motorized systems for these guns. You could actually get one computerized, what they called a director, a fire director, a central aiming device that you'd have a guy actually aiming at a target, and you could actually wire it up.
That says primarily for naval emplacements. Sorry, the captions are in the way. I don't know why I have the captions on, but whatever.
To 4 separate Bofors guns and slave them all to this single director and use them in that way. And that's just super cool that that sort of technology was available and actually in use in World War II. Now, well, thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video.
Okay, so he did not get into how they were acquired by the U.S., which, like I said, to me is just a really interesting story. So I'm going to tell it a little bit, or tell it, to the best of my abilities. And I'm going to pull up the story from the U.S. Naval Institute to do it. Okay, so here it is, and I'll put the link to this down in the description for the video so you can read the whole thing if you want. But it says, by 1940, the U.S. Navy had become aware of this weapon's reportedly remarkable effectiveness, but struggled with how to obtain samples for evaluation. Europe was wrapped in conflict, with German forces largely isolating Sweden by their campaigns in Denmark and Norway. And we obviously talked about how Sweden and Germany were kind of like trying to play each other, kind of trying to work around each other. We talked about it in a couple of videos, but specifically the one I can think of is could the Germans have successfully basically blitzkrieged the Swedes? It says, their answer came in the converted passenger liner American Legion. She departed New York City in February 1940 on her maiden voyage as a military transport bound for Panama. During the next few months, the ship made 5 round-trip voyages to the Panama Canal Zone, carrying civilian and military passengers. The worsening situation in Europe led to the ship being given a special mission. Soon thereafter, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt personally directed that the American Legion sail from New York as soon as possible for Petsamo, Finland. At this time, Finland was officially neutral, although friendly to Nazi Germany, and engaged in planning for renewal of the conflict against the Soviet Union. So, obviously referencing the continuation war there. At Petsamo, the American Legion was to embark Crown Princess Martha of Norway and her party to bring them to the United States, Norway having been seized by Germany the previous spring. The president also desired that Florence Jaffrey Harriman, the former U.S. minister to Norway, return in the ship, along with other U.S. citizens that were trying to leave Scandinavian countries. The American Legion sailed for Finland on the 25th of July, 1940, with her neutrality shown clearly by the U.S. flags painted prominently on her off-white sides. She reached Petsamo on the 6th of August, and on the 15th, oh, hey, it's my birthday, she embarked Crown Princess Martha and her 3 children. The Army operated troop ship also embarked numerous U.S. nationals as well as refugees from Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Germany, and the Netherlands. 897 passengers in all. Um, Unbeknownst to all but a handful of individuals on the ship, the American Legion also took on board an important cargo during the stay at Petsamo. After a Herculean effort that involved taking a special cargo by truck the entire length of Sweden, the ship loaded a twin mount 40mm Bofors anti-aircraft gun, spare parts, and 3,000 rounds of ammunition. The U.S. State Department had obtained the cooperation of 3 governments to make the shipment possible of the Bofors gun: the British, the Swedish, and the Finnish. The move came none too soon, for the American Legion was the last neutral ship to depart Petsamo. The vessel reached New York without incident after an Atlantic crossing of 12 days, escorted for the final leg by several U.S. destroyers. The transport unloaded the Bofors at New York, from where it was immediately shipped to a Navy test facility in Virginia. The tests were successful. The gun was quickly copied and placed in production, and its installation in U.S. warships began soon after. So, that is the story of how the U.S. was able to even obtain the parts needed to do the testing, because they wanted to test to see how beneficial it would be. And, they wanted to figure it out. How do you get them from a war zone? Because, seemingly everybody that's using them is in the middle of a war. They need their guns. You're not going to just walk in there and try to grab one. So it becomes a bit of a situation. How are we going to obtain this? That's how. It's a really interesting story to me. I really like it. And I believe they call it the L60. Is that correct? Maybe that's not right. I don't remember. Maybe it's the L40 and the L60s, the later variant. Golly, I'm telling you, I've done so much reading on this particular gun and the variants that were after it that I feel like it's all just jumbled in my brain. But really, really incredible gun for the time period, especially. Guns in this time period during World War II are super interesting to me because technology is moving so fast. Everybody's trying to find an edge in every theater for every new piece of tech or new plane or new part or whatever that's come out. It's this constant back and forth, and so the weapons of this time period and the systems in general are just incredibly interesting to me. And the Bofors 40mm is one of those because it saw so much use and was so successful. So, as always, like, comment, subscribe. Help me keep building the channel over here. I'll put the link to the original video for Forgotten Weapons down below in the description box. There will also be a link to the Discord down there if you want to jump over there and join these conversations. And with all that being said, I'll see you all next time.